Towers of blackened glass and broken transport rails lay half buried in sand, as if time itself had given up on cleaning the scars of war. But in the center of it all, a single outpost stood breathing, just barely. A rectangular compound of metal and solar-battered ceramic, crouched low to the ground like a soldier waiting for an ambush. Its lights blinked slowly, its air filters hummed. The world around it had been abandoned years ago. Inside, Warren Hale poured recycled water into a dented kettle, the sound hollow in the silence. He moved like a man older than he was, every step methodical, every motion built on routine. Outside, solar panels buzzed under decaying light, and the proximity sensors blinked a flat green. No movement, no signals, no company, just the way he preferred it. He hadn't spoken to another living soul in 1,142 days. Warren wasn't a hermit. He was a man who'd made peace with exile. Once a combat survivalist under the Terran Peace Corps, he'd spent half his life cleaning up the messes other people made. First on Eros, then in the orbital domes above Venus, then in the fire fields of Corinfiv. He'd seen entire colonies reduced to statistics. And when the war with the Ynnari collective ended, he vanished. No medals, no goodbyes, just silence. He built this station out of scavenged gear and traded parts, installed 6 defense turrets, and pointed every camera outward. Out here, the only enemy was memory. He was halfway through tightening a faulty stabilizer bolt on the hydro rationing pump when it happened. A soft beep, then another. He froze. Movement. The sensors hadn't gone off in years. Warren stood slowly, hand drifting to the plasma rifle hanging on the wall. A quick glance at the perimeter feed showed nothing at first. Just drifting sand, static, broken metal. Then, shapes, stumbling, slipping. 5 of them. Humanoid but not human. They came from the North Ridge, where the atmosphere turned thin and toxic. No ship, no transport, no logic. Warren grabbed his rifle and stepped into the cold. The wind slapped hard across the metal walkway as he exited the main door. His boots thudded against sand-caked steel. The sky was dim now, bleeding deeper into purple. And on the slope below, 5 figures crawled. They reached the edge of the compound and collapsed. Warren moved down the incline like a ghost, rifle raised, finger poised, every muscle remembering instinct. His visor highlighted their vitals. Faint, dehydrated, heat-stressed. One, likely the youngest, had a fractured leg. Another clutched her side like something inside had cracked. All 5 were Ynnari. Distinct eyes, faint skin glimmer, braided hair dyed in hues that glowed even in low light, and all were female. He stopped 5 meters away. "You armed?" None answered. The one in front, the tallest, lifted her head. Her jaw was bruised, her lips split, her voice cracked in the translator field. "No weapons, no fight. We ask only for roof," and Warren's jaw tightened. Every warning in his brain screamed. 5 Ynnari women traveling alone across a dead planet during a time of declared ceasefire? Not possible. Not random. He scanned the sky. No ships, no drones. But this wasn't right. His grip on the rifle eased just slightly. Inside, slow, no tricks. The leader didn't nod. She didn't thank him. She simply placed a hand on the youngest shoulder and rose. The others followed. They entered the outpost in silence. He gave them water, protein bars, a chance to sit. He stayed armed. They didn't ask for more. Their names weren't offered. Their story wasn't spoken. Not yet. But Warren noticed the things soldiers notice. They were organized. They stayed close, backs to walls, movements efficient. One tended to the injured girl's leg with a strip of synth fiber torn from her own clothing. Another checked every air vent, as if scanning for traps. They weren't just survivors. They were refugees who had fought to survive. They didn't beg. They didn't plead. They waited. Warren stepped back into the main command room, placed his rifle down, but within reach, and watched them through the semi-reflective glass. What in hell were they doing here? The peace accords had relocated most surviving Ynnari species to the warmer colonies in the Uranus belt. Those who didn't comply vanished. Rumors said some were hunted, others enslaved. Few ever made it beyond the borders of Terran-controlled sectors. So why now? Why here? And why 5 unarmed, half-dead Yanari women walking across a dead moon? He reviewed his sensor logs, static bursts, possible signal jamming, a false echo in the north. Something chased them. He didn't know what, but he knew this. They weren't running towards safety. They were running from something worse. Hours passed. The youngest drifted into sleep first, curled beside a vent for warmth. The limping one sat upright, guarding her. The shyest of them positioned herself near the backup exit, one hand always close to a rusted wrench. The leader, still unnamed, stood by the window. She hadn't sat down once. She was watching the horizon. Every few minutes she checked the northern ridge, then the blind spot beneath the generator slab. Warren didn't interrupt, but something in her posture told him she'd done this before, led others, lost people, expected betrayal. He remembered that look. He'd seen it in mirrors once, long ago. Later that night, Warren stood near the heating core, alone again. The 5 women were asleep or pretending to be. He drank bitter, rehydrated tea from a steel cup and stared at the rifle leaning against the wall. He hadn't meant to let anyone in again. Ever. He'd sworn he was done with the wars, the flags, the causes, the guilt. But when he saw them collapsing in the dust, alien or not, he hadn't seen enemies. He'd seen exhaustion, the kind that comes after you've lost everything. And maybe something inside him wasn't as dead as he'd hoped. Outside, the wind howled like a forgotten gum. Inside, 5 fugitives breathed softly under flickering heat lamps. And Warren Hale, a man who once promised never to choose a side again, was standing at the edge of a new war. And this time, the line had already been drawn. In footsteps across red sand, in bruises on proud faces, in the silence of the hunted who refused to fall. He sipped the last of his tea, set the cup down, and walked to the main door. Tomorrow, he would ask them for the truth. Tonight, he would stand guard. The next morning arrived like it always did on Virex 7, quiet, gray, and cold enough to freeze breath in the air. A burnt orange haze hovered on the horizon, casting a dull glow over the desert dunes, but it offered no warmth. The planet spun without mercy, its surface whispering in wind and frost. Warren Hale was already outside when the first of them stirred. He stood near the auxiliary water tanks, tightening pressure seals with gloved fingers, his breath fogging inside his helmet visor. The scanner clip to his chest beeped once, just once. Low power reading. Nothing alive. Nothing moving. But that didn't settle the unease in his spine. Something had shifted in the outpost since their arrival. Not just the air. The silence was different. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was listening. He turned slowly and saw the leader standing in the main doorway. No jacket, no fear. Her arms were crossed over her chest, and her eyes were scanning the horizon, not at him. At the same points he watched, the canyon break, the blind angles between the rocks, the east ridge where sensor range dropped 30%. She wasn't watching him. She was watching with him. He nodded once. She didn't nod back, but her shoulders relaxed, just a little. Inside, the other 4 had started moving. No one asked permission. No one waited for orders. They simply began to work. The tall one with the braid, a dolly, he had begun calling her in his mind, though she hadn't said it yet, dragged the broken solar panel frame across the yard and began realigning the brackets. She worked efficiently, using both hands even when her fingers bled. Warren stepped closer. "You know what you're doing?" he asked. She didn't look up. "I worked comms array back home. Before, she didn't finish the sentence. He didn't push. The girl with the bandaged leg limped toward the hydroponics bay, carrying buckets that were too heavy for her size. The smallest one, Mina, perhaps, tried to help but got waved away with a whisper. The older woman was already in the kitchen unit, sorting ration packs by protein count, scanning them with a battered Yanari med scanner she must have hidden in her robes. They weren't taking. They were contributing. That surprised him more than anything. In all the outposts, in all the raids, in all the refugee camps he'd seen over the years, Warren had never seen this. Survivors who earned their space before asking for it. They weren't hiding, they were rebuilding. Later that day, he caught a dolly recalibrating the perimeter sensor. How did you learn Terran engineering? He asked. Her fingers never stopped moving. Occupation does not destroy intelligence. Only delays it, Warren frowned. She hadn't meant it as defiance, just a truth. He watched her finish rewiring the junction node, sparks flickering, heat coils sealing. You ever fire a weapon? He asked, testing. She glanced at him. I fire. I fall. I bury. That shut him up. By dusk, the wind picked up again. Warren stood on the edge of the compound's landing pad, watching the blue sun vanish behind ash-colored clouds. A few meters behind him, the women gathered near the makeshift heat core, sharing warmth, patching torn sleeves, breaking the last protein loaf into silent shares. He wasn't used to the sound of others breathing nearby. He wasn't used to trusting anyone. But when he looked at them now, dirt on their faces, steam rising from chipped metal cups, bruises they never complained about, he realized something dangerous. He didn't mind them being here. And maybe that was the first mistake. Because comfort, he knew, came right before betrayal. Night settled hard. Warren's hand rested on the plasma rifle near the command desk, even as his eyes blinked heavy with exhaustion. He hadn't fully slept since they arrived. He didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way Adali never truly rested, always watching with one eye open. But he knew something else was coming. The scans had been too quiet, the stars too still. And then it happened. A blip, red dot, upper right quadrant, moving slow, controlled, tracking. He bolted upright. Adali was already standing. They followed us, she said, voice like metal wrapped in cloth. Warren didn't ask how she knew. He just handed her a rifle. She stared at it. You trust us with weapons? You trust me with your lives, he replied. She accepted it, checked the chamber like someone who'd done this many times. Warren activated the perimeter shields. His fingers danced across the console. If they're coming, we have less than 20 minutes. Then we don't run, she said. I wasn't planning on it. They moved fast. The older woman took the youngest into the storage bay, bolting the door from inside. The middle two, Sani and Shala, he was beginning to learn, armed themselves with thermal drills and modified scrap blades. Adali climbed to the roof platform and laid prone, rifle across her arms, scope scanning the ridgeline. Warren joined her moments later, his own rifle already loaded. You realize, he muttered, eyes fixed on the distance, this is the dumbest thing I've done in 10 years. Adali smiled, just faintly. But not wrong. He almost laughed. Almost. The shadow appeared at 400 meters, a lone figure in dark armor, moving with exo-assisted precision. Not a scout, not a merchant, bounty hunter. Warren recognized the model of gear, Tarson RX-7, black market grade, heat masking, high impact. Whoever was hunting the women wasn't doing it for justice. This was a collection job, and these women were the bounty. The rifle's rangefinder beeped. Locked. Don't fire unless he crosses the beacon line, Warren said, jaw clenched. Adali didn't respond. The hunter moved closer, 300 meters, 250. Then he stopped, looked up, stared right at the outpost. He raised a hand, not waving, signaling. Warren flicked the comm switch on his belt. A crackling voice came through. You harboring fugitives, human? Warren didn't blink. I'm housing survivors. Terran law says they're property. Then the law is broken. The pause that followed was long enough to stretch a heartbeat. You don't want to get involved, old man. I already am. The transmission cut. Warren looked through his scope. The bounty hunter was walking away, but that didn't mean retreat. It meant he'd report. More would come. They both knew it. When Warren descended from the roof, Adali followed. He set the rifle aside. So, now we wait? She shook her head. Now we prepare. He watched her for a moment, then asked softly, What were you before all this? She hesitated, then, tactical lead? Yanari planetary resistance. You're not just survivors, he said, you're warriors. No, she replied, we're what's left. That night, as the outpost hummed low and distant stars shimmered behind clouds of frozen dust, Warren sat beside the fire core with all 5 women. They didn't speak much, but when he handed the youngest a bowl of hot synth stew, her hands trembled. Not from pain, from not knowing what safety felt like. Warren sat back against the steel wall, rifle within arm's reach, eyes scanning the windows. They were hunted. He was involved. The past he thought he buried had returned, with alien eyes, with wounded hands, with stories still unspoken. And for reasons he couldn't explain yet, he didn't feel regret. He felt ready. The outpost no longer felt like a shelter. It felt like a line in the dust, one no one would cross without a fight. The first light scraped across the canyons, painting the dunes with red fire. The outpost stood still in the cold, half buried in frost and silence. Nothing moved except the faint glimmer of defense shields rippling under the morning glare. Warren Hale had been awake since before the sky turned. He hadn't slept. None of them had. The bounty hunter's signal transmission was still replaying in his head, broken by static, but enough to know what came next. They knew. The Terran Authority. The Bounty Corps. Maybe both. He stood by the comm relay, gloved fingers resting on a cracked terminal. The scanner display showed no life within 10 kilometers, but he knew better than to believe it. Military patrols never showed up on civilian scanners until it was too late. Behind him, the women worked quietly. Adali was cleaning her rifle again, movement slow, deliberate. The older one, Shala, was reweaving a damaged heat wrap. Mina was limping less, using an old drone rod as a walking stick. Nolly and Sani were tending the hydro rack, whispering in their own tongue. Survival had its rhythm again. But beneath that rhythm, Warren could feel it. The same pulse he felt in war zones right before the first shot. Pressure. The air around them had changed. Even the silence seemed to breathe differently, as if the planet itself was waiting. He stepped outside to clear his head. The air bit through his jacket, thin and sharp like static. Across the dunes, storm clouds gathered over the northern ridge. Purple lightning rippled through them. It wasn't natural. Electromagnetic interference. A ship. He raised his scope. A glint of metal flashed far out, then disappeared behind the ridge. His stomach tightened. Adali appeared beside him without a word, scarf drawn against the wind. Her eyes, as always, scanned what he scanned. Military, she asked. Not civilian. Too high energy. They're coming in quiet. She was silent for a beat, then said, "They will ask." "You will lie again?" He looked at her. "And if they don't believe it?" She adjusted the scope for him, her gloved hand brushing his. "Then we fight." Her tone wasn't dramatic. It was calm, certain. Warren found himself staring at her longer than he meant to. For the first time, he realized she wasn't afraid of dying. She was only afraid of being taken back. The patrol ship arrived before noon. It came low, stirring up waves of dust and frost. The engines howled across the barren plains, sending shockwaves through the old fences. Warren's turrets locked automatically, tracking movement until he overrode them. "Stand down," he told the AI core. "Manual control." The women stayed inside, hidden in the maintenance bay, though Adali refused to leave the viewing slit. She gripped the rifle like a lifeline. Warren didn't argue. He stepped out alone. The ship's landing gear hissed against the cracked soil, steam rising in ghostly coils. A Terran insignia glimmered faintly on the hull, a black sun on silver. Peace Corps Division, Enforcement Wing. That name used to mean something. Now it only meant authority without conscience. The side hatch hissed open. Two figures stepped down, rifles across their chests. The first was younger, armored but nervous. The second, older, heavier, cold eyes, carried the weight of command. Warren recognized that type, men who'd stopped questioning orders decades ago. The officer nodded once. "Morning, citizen." "Morning, Tar," Warren replied steady. "Mind if we ask a few questions?" "That depends who's asking." The officer smirked. "Captain Drevin, Terran Enforcement. We're tracking a fugitive group, 5 Yanari females. Escaped from detention camp Delta 7. Dangerous, potentially armed." Warren's jaw didn't move. "You think they'd come here?" "Scanners picked up faint biosigns 2 clicks north of this post last night." Drevin's eyes flicked past Warren toward the outpost windows. "You live alone?" "For years now." "Strange place for company," the man said, stepping closer. "Mind if we look around?" Warren blocked his path. "Depends what you're looking for." "Runaways, Mr. Hale." "Not here." Drevin's jaw tightened. "You sure about that?" "I'd know if someone crossed my land." The second soldier shifted uneasily. Drevin studied Warren for a long moment, eyes narrowing. He was testing, measuring the tremor in Warren's voice, the stance of his feet, the lie sitting on his tongue. But Warren had been lying to soldiers long before this one was born. After a tense silence, Drevin exhaled through his teeth. If you see anything, you report it. There's reward money, enough to buy you a better life than this rust pile. Warren's stare didn't flinch. This rust pile's the only honest life I've got left. Drevin smirked again. Pathetic. He turned and gestured to his pilot. The ship roared to life, kicking up another storm of dust before lifting off. It turned once over the horizon, scanning the ridge, then faded into the clouds. Only when the rumble disappeared did Warren release the breath he'd been holding. Inside, the women were waiting near the shadows. They'd heard everything. Mina's eyes were wide. Nali was trembling. Chala's face was stone. Adali stepped forward first. You lied for us again, she said. He shrugged. I told him what needed saying. You risk death, she said, not as accusation but fact. I've seen worse, he replied. Her gaze held his, searching. You do not fear them? I fear silence more. Her expression shifted then, something small, something like understanding. For the first time, she stood up closer instead of keeping distance. The moment hung in air, heavy with everything neither said. Then we help, she murmured. We make your place strong. The next hours blurred into work. Adali and Warren reinforced the power core's housing, welding metal plates across the weakened seams. Chala and Sony dug into the sand near the greenhouse and unearthed an old fiber line, Warren's forgotten defense relay. Mina limped between them with tools, refusing to rest even when pain twisted her face. By nightfall, the outpost looked different, alive. Wires hummed, shields pulsed brighter. The AI core flickered with new energy. Warren stood back and watched them work in rhythm, silent, efficient, unspoken coordination that came from years of survival. They didn't ask him for food. They didn't wait for gratitude. They simply built. And for the first time in years, Warren felt like he wasn't building alone. That night, as stars shimmered through the cracked dome overhead, the outpost was quiet again. But it wasn't empty. He found Adali sitting near the generator bay, her hands wrapped in worn cloth from the heat burns. She looked up when he approached. You should rest, he said. I don't know how, she replied softly. He sat beside her, the floor vibrating faintly under their boots. When I was stationed on Corin 5, he said, I watched a city burn because my commander said it was necessary. They told us it would end the war faster. Maybe it did, but it ended something else too. Adali studied his face, silent. That's why you live alone, she said. He nodded. I got tired of watching people follow orders that kill the wrong ones. Her fingers brushed the edge of his glove. Then maybe, she said quietly, you stop watching. He turned to her, not understanding. What do you mean? She met his gaze. You stand. The words hit harder than they should have. Not shouted, not dramatic, just truth. Warren looked away toward the horizon through the observation glass, where faint stars blinked under the storm haze. He'd spent years building walls between himself and the world. But the world had found its way back to him anyway, through 5 half-starved fugitives who refused to die quietly. He stood. Adali rose with him. Outside, lightning flared again in the far ridge, too clean to be natural, too straight to be chance. A new signal, more ships, more danger. But Warren didn't feel the old fear crawling up his spine this time. He felt purpose. Wake the others, he said quietly. If the law's coming again. He chambered a round into his rifle. Then this time, the law doesn't leave. On Virex 7, snow wasn't white. It fell in sheets of gray dust and toxic frost, laced with metallic ash and static charge. Winds howled across the canyons, blasting against the outpost's shielded walls, turning the sky into a swirling mass of steel-colored chaos. Inside, the outpost glowed with dim warmth. Warren Hale stood near the central monitor array, watching the live feed from the West Ridge. The signal flickered every few seconds, scrambled by a storm surge, but he caught enough to see the shape. One ship, then another, and then 4 more. Heavy troop transports, not bounty corps, Terran authority, military grade. He didn't move, He didn't blink. Adali stepped into the room, her scarf pulled tight, hair braided down her back like a war banner. You saw them? He nodded. They come with orders this time, she said, not questions. Yeah, he murmured, and they won't ask twice. She stepped beside him, arms crossed. For a moment, they stood shoulder to shoulder, watching the storm roll in, not as fugitives and host, but as something else, as defenders. Warren turned to her. You still want to run? Adali shook her head. We ran too far already. Behind them, the rest of the women gathered, Kala, Nali, Sani, Mina, each carrying gear, tools, patched weapons. Their faces were tired, but not broken. No one begged for mercy. No one asked for rescue. Warren pointed toward the sealed east corridor. That's the fallback point. If the walls breach, it'll give us 8 minutes of cover. No fallback, Challa said firmly. We stand here. He hesitated. If this goes bad, I need you alive. We decide that, Adali said, and her voice was softer now. But we do not leave you behind. Warren stared at her, really looked, and saw the truth behind her words. They had chosen him, not because he was strong or kind or even safe, but because when the world hunted them, he hadn't turned away. And in this broken galaxy, that was rarer than oxygen. He reached for the old trunk beside the console. Inside, 3 revolvers, 2 energy cartridges, a fusion core blade, and an antique Terran combat knife. He hadn't opened the case in years. He passed the weapons out slowly, one by one. And just like that, the outpost wasn't a shelter anymore. It was a fortress. The storm howled louder by midday, turrets powered up, tripwires set, barricades raised. Mina helped string sensor relays along the north wall despite her limp. Sani positioned herself at the south window with a pulse scrambler and her teeth clenched like a soldier pretending not to shake. Warren took the rooftop, rifle in hand. Adali joined him, as always. The first dropship landed at 1523 Standard. It kicked up a cyclone of ash and static, drowning the fields in noise. Boots hit the ground. 12, maybe 15 soldiers, armored head to toe. Not scouts, enforcers. One man walked ahead of them, helmetless. His coat was black. His chest bore a high-tier Peace Corps insignia. Warren stared through the scope. Commander Talvin. He'd served under him once, back when Warren still believed orders meant something. He felt Adali watching him, but he said nothing. Talvin raised a loudspeaker. Outpost 73K, you are harboring war fugitives. By Terran Treaty 429-Theta, you are ordered to surrender all non-human life forms into official custody. The wind hissed through cracked satellite dishes. No one moved. Warren flipped the external come to broadcast. This is Independent Outpost 73K. You are trespassing on private land. I see no warrant, no tribunal order, no search writ. Talvin's expression didn't change. This is military authority. I do not need permission. You do here, Warren replied. Last I checked, this moon wasn't under martial law. The soldiers behind Talvin fanned out, rifles raised. The outpost shields crackled as snow pelted harder against the dome. Adali's voice came low beside him. He will push. I know. He will test your name. Your soul Warren chambered around. I'm done letting others define either. Talvin's voice grew cold. Final warning. You have 60 seconds to comply. Warren glanced at Adali. She didn't flinch. You sure about this? He asked. She looked at him. We were sure the night we crossed the desert. But now we are not alone. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. He stepped into the camera feed and stared straight into the transmission. Come and take them, he said, and then he fired. The first shot ripped through the snowstorm, striking one soldier square in the chest. Armor cracked, man down. Alarms blared inside the outpost. The women scattered to their posts. Turrets whirred to life, raining suppression fire over the ridge. Nolly launched the defense drones into orbit. 3 outdated, barely flying, but mean enough to distract. Talvin ducked behind a thermal rock slab, cursing into his comms. The soldiers advanced. But the storm was their enemy now, too. Visibility dropped. Coordination broke. Warren and Adali fired from the rooftop side by side. She didn't speak. She didn't breathe hard. She just moved with him like they'd been trained together all their lives. At one point, she pushed him out of the way before a plasma burst ripped through the rooftop frame. His rifle jammed. Hers didn't. She covered him without hesitation. This wasn't protection. This was partnership. Below, Chala and Sunny repelled the breach attempt on the east wall with makeshift mines in sheer defiance. Mana, bloodied but standing, recharged energy cells faster than Warren could fire them. It wasn't clean, it wasn't pretty, but it held. Because they refused to surrender. Because they chose not to lose. An hour later, the Terran forces retreated under covering smoke. Talvin's ship lifted off, damage flickering across its left wing. He didn't speak again. Didn't leave a message. Didn't promise to return. But Warren knew it wasn't over. The law didn't forget challenges. It waited. Still, for now, they had won. The rooftop was scorched, the outer shield fried, 2 drones destroyed. Mina needed her leg rewrapped. Sunny had a burn along her arm, but none of them had died, and the outpost still stood. As the wind began to settle and night pulled shadows across the broken field, Warren stepped out to inspect the damage. He found a dolly in the corridor, cleaning her rifle beside a cracked panel. Her braid was loose now, streaked with ash and sweat. A shallow cut marked her cheek. He knelt beside her without a word and passed her a bandage. She didn't look at him, but her voice came quiet. "You stood with us." "I live here too." She finally turned. "You didn't have to." "I did," he said, "because this place isn't just mine anymore." She tied the bandage slow and firm. "Then we stay. No more running. You sure?" Adali reached forward and placed her fingers over his wrist, just briefly. "I was never more sure of anything." Warren didn't pull away, and for the first time, he didn't feel like a man haunted by ghosts. He felt like part of something still breathing, still worth fighting for. Later that night, they gathered around the flickering fire core, wrapped in silence, bruised but unbroken. No one cheered, no one wept. They sat close, together. And Warren realized the truth. He had stood between them and the world, and they had done the same for him. This wasn't war, it was home, and he would defend it until the last star faded from the Virex sky. Snow fell softly in the silence that followed the battle. Not the kind of snow you'd find on Earth. This was Virex snow, laced with ash and mineral dust, glowing faintly under the light of the broken moons. It painted the outpost rooftops in a soft silver sheen and covered the blast craters like the planet was trying to heal its own wounds. Inside the compound, light returned slowly. Sparks hissed, walls groaned, but the shields held. Warren Hale stood at the edge of the blast door, shoulders squared, staring at the jagged prints left by retreating boots. The Terran gunship was gone. The soldiers who came to take what wasn't theirs had fled into the storm. The line had been drawn. And for once, the good side had held. Behind him, the outpost was stirring. Adali emerged from the infirmary module, her braid tied tight again, bandage fresh across her cheek. Sonny followed, limping slightly, supporting Mina, who smiled despite her split lip. Nolly carried salvage coils over one shoulder. Chala had a stun spear leaning against her hip. No one looked defeated. No one looked afraid. They looked like what they were now, people who had claimed their ground and survived to defend it again. Warren turned back to the horizon. The snow kept falling, but for the first time in years, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like quiet, and quiet in this world was sacred. Over the next 2 days, the outpost transformed. Mena dug irrigation trenches from the fusion core runoff. Chala began converting an old storeroom into a food cellar. Nolly mapped the nearest mineral veins for expansion. Sani taught Warren a few Yanari planning rituals, half superstitious, half science. In Adali stayed by his side. They reinforced walls together, rewired the radar, set solar traps on the high rocks. At night, they sat near the power bank fire, drinking boiled root tea in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because they no longer needed words to share space. Warren had stopped waiting for them to leave. They had stopped expecting to be chased. This was theirs now. On the third morning, Warren saddled his old transport hover, not to run, not to patrol, but to go to town. "Supply run," he said simply, strapping down the fuel cells. Everyone paused. He looked at Adali. "They'll ask questions." You'll lie, she replied. He smirked. Getting good at that. Her expression didn't soften. And if they don't believe you? Warren's voice was quiet. Then they'll learn that this land doesn't forget who stood on it. He glanced at Mina, whose leg was healing. At Sani, who now smiled when she worked. At Kala, who had claimed the eastern sunrise as her daily ritual. At Nali, who started humming again. And at Adali, who had once watched the stars like she expected them to betray her. Now she looked at him like he was her gravity. Warren returned 2 days later. They saw the dust trail before they saw his transport. Adali was the first to step out the gates. She didn't run, she didn't speak, she just waited. When he dismounted, he dropped 2 ration crates at her feet and gave her a tired nod. No one followed, he said. Sheriff gave me a long stare. Townsfolk whispered. But no one moved. Adali narrowed her eyes. They fear you? No, they fear the idea that I don't fear them. She didn't answer, but her hand brushed his as she reached for the supplies. A gesture brief but deliberate. That night they shared stew under the dome. The lights flickered warm. The generator hummed. The storm had passed. Warren sat at the table, Adali beside him, the others spread around the chamber. Boots off, gloves drying, weapons oiled and stored. No alarms, no shadows at the fence. Just breath, fire, and silence that finally felt earned. They weren't waiting for the next war. They were living. And that, Warren realized, was the biggest defiance of all. Weeks passed. Winter settled in. The outpost became something else. Not a bunker, a home. They planted food in dome beds. They filtered water through hybrid algae tanks. They repaired the old comms tower, but didn't send a distress signal. They didn't want to be found. They wanted to exist together. Warren and Adali repaired the north wall one afternoon when the sky was calm. As they welded steel over fractured alloy, Warren caught himself staring at her hands. Steady, scarred, capable. You were a soldier once, he said. She glanced at him, surprised. And you still think I'm not? He smiled faintly. No, I think we both stopped being just soldiers. We became something else, she wiped her brow. What? People worth fighting beside. Adali stepped closer, welding torch hanging loose in her hand. I never trusted a Terran before, she said. Warren's voice was rough. I stopped trusting myself a long time ago. She studied him, eyes sharp, unwavering. Then we both made mistakes. The wind swept past them, but neither looked away. Then she added softly, let's not make them again. And Warren, for once, had no answer. He just nodded. The final scene came with the first sign of spring, if such a thing existed on Virex 7. The air had softened. The dust storms grew less violent. And in the north field, beneath layers of frost-bitten soil, the first signs of life pushed through. Kala stood beside a small green sprout, her face unreadable. Adali joined her. So did Sani and Mina. Warren watched from a distance. He thought of how the outpost once looked. Gray, dead, forgotten. Now it breathed. He stepped beside Adali and handed her a carved marker stone, painted with the Yanari word for begin. She placed it gently in the dirt, then looked up at him. You said we were surviving, she said, but you were wrong. He raised a brow. We're not surviving anymore. She reached for his hand. We're building. Warren didn't pull away, and for the first time in years, he looked toward the horizon and didn't see ghosts. He saw tomorrow.